Chapter 99, The Butterfly Effect. Feixiang Palace, Wenjiu. Zhang Xuning of the Fixiang Hall knows, but if you want to say anything about Wenjiu, then she has no impression. Listening to this position, it's not very high in the harem, what can it lead to? Thinking in this direction, I have no clue. On her way back to fasting, she only felt that this matter was very important, so she racked her brains and simply forced herself to think in another direction. Did anything major happen at this time in the previous life? The biggest thing is that the Yanji Marquis mansion was raided. At that time, after she came back from the home mansion, she was so frightened that she fell seriously ill and was bedridden for several days, during which only Shenju, the king of Linzi, still thought about her from time to time, and sent someone to greet her to see the situation. When she recovered, she only heard that someone in Beijing had robbed the prison, and the emperor was furious like thunder, and punished many officials in Beijing, and many ministers were killed. Anything else? For example, many days have passed, why did Shen Lang suddenly become angry again? It had only snowed 2 days ago, and the weather had already turned cold, and there was no sound on the palace road. Only the sound of her soft footsteps passed away. A thought turned, and a lightning bolt flashed in her mind. Zhang Xunning's steps that had been moving forward suddenly stopped, and her eyes widened together. In addition to the chaos of the party and the robbery of the prison, during the time when she was sick, there seemed to be a thing in the palace that was not too big to be placed in other dynasties, but it was definitely not a small thing in this dynasty, especially during Shen Lang's reign. Asterisk. Back in Yang's Hizai, everyone was already preparing for the afternoon plum blossom snow appreciation. This time, Zhang Xuning was not sick, so naturally she couldn't hold on to her illness anymore. So I had to pack up my plain clothes, put on a powder and blue cloak, and in the crowd of people who were competing for beauty, I was just in the middle, neither because I was too out of line to be noticed, nor because I was too shabby. She looked the same as ever. It hadn't been long since others were under the same roof with her, but they couldn't see anything. But Zhang Suiwai is also her sister, no matter how she says it. Even if the two sisters usually have a holiday, they can be regarded as having some understanding. Somehow, looking at her and feeling that she has a layer of shadow on her face, she quietly turned her head to look at her 3 times on the way to the plum garden, and her brows furrowed slightly, but when she thought about the relationship between the two, she didn't ask after all. Zhang Xuning was happy. The plum blossoms planted in the plum garden are in full bloom at this time. The snow of the first 2 days has not yet melted away, piled under the plum tree. It is the blue sky and white snow reflecting the red plum. It is very beautiful. In the harem, led by the Empress Dowager Xiao, everyone has basically arrived. In the southeast corner of the plum garden, most of the companions of Yang's Hizai finally saw the emperor's harem for the first time after entering the palace for so long, the concubines of the Son of Heaven. The first person to sit at the top is the Empress Dowager Xiao. Below is Empress Zhang, who has been carefully dressed, and below is the concubines whose makeup is more delicate than the other. All of them are big beauties, or cold or lazy, with thousands of postures. Some speak in a low voice, and some are hearty and generous. At first glance, it is really admirable. When the emperor's 3 palaces and 6 courtyards, there are countless concubines, and it can really be said that he has enjoyed the blessings of all people. Zhang Xuning raised her head when she arrived, and couldn't help frowning slightly, feeling a little disdain in her heart. Shenju, the king of Linzi, was not a person who indulged in lust, but his brother Shen Lang was a person who would enjoy it when he was in power, and some ministers could not stand it, and they advised him to quit it at the banquet, which was no longer attacked, but where would Shen Lang listen? Instead, he became angry, and soon found an excuse to transfer the minister out of Beijing. The heirs are difficult, can this not be difficult? Fortunately, he has an imperial brother Shenju, who has had a good relationship since he was a child, and he does have a sense of eldest brother like a father, and Shenju is indeed obedient, so it has always been rumored in the court that the emperor has no heirs and appoints the emperor's younger brother as the prince, so as to block the world's mouth. Jiang Xuning didn't recognize many of these concubines. Judging from her few contacts in the previous life, at most she knew that the one sitting on the queen's right hand was wearing a luxurious emerald headdress and was a little lazy was Qin Gaifei, who was now favored in the harem. Not to mention Wen Jiu. Zheng Bao warned her first, and she remembered all the way that when she went in with everyone to worship, she intentionally or unintentionally fell behind, and after the ceremony, she naturally sat in the last seat, and naturally stayed away from the concubines. Xiao Shu glanced at her very vaguely. Jiang Xuning was unconscious. After the companions read in, these concubines in the harem looked at these young and undermarried girls, and their eyes were different, but Queen Zheng has never been very favored, and she is probably used to seeing the scene of new people replacing old people in the palace, not to mention that these young girls are not in the harem but just read together, but they are the most natural and kind one with their expressions, and they also took the initiative to mention another thing. A few days ago, the saint mentioned to the concubines the matter of choosing a concubine for His Royal Highness the King of Linzi, saying that His Royal Highness is more of a young man, and it is time for His Royal Highness to start a family, so that he can be more stable. His Royal Highness and the Holy Lord are both from the Queen Mother, and this time I am afraid that I will have to work hard for Her Highness, so I looked at each other carefully. Today's Empress Dowager Xiao has long lost the gloomy face of a few days ago. After all, what is happening in the court now is almost everything to her liking, so the spring breeze is full of face, and the whole person looks even younger. Empress Zheng's words were also pleasing to her. King Linzi finally wants to choose a concubine, which means that he wants to start a family, which is naturally good news for Empress Dowager Xiao, a mother, so it is rare not to pick the thorn of Empress Zheng, but said with a smile, although this matter is handled by the Ministry of Etiquette, how can a man's family understand the matter of marriage better than a woman's family? Empress Zheng was a little flattered, and hurriedly said, the concubine must do her best, and I also look forward to His Royal Highness marrying a satisfactory princess. Qin Gaifei, who was sitting below, was holding a delicate hand stove in her arms, but when she heard the words, she raised her eyelids, and lazily glanced at the group of Yang's Hizai companions in the most corner, and elongated her voice and quipped, if you want the concubine to say, where is the need to work so hard? Oh, don't the most talented and good-looking girls in the capital sit there? If you want me to say, Her Royal Highness the eldest princess chooses this companion to read with one stone, and in fact, it saves you to choose again. I'm afraid that our Princess Linzi is here right now. This is not a favored person who dare not say it. After saying this, Empress Dowager Xiao's eyes fell on her, and she also looked at the companions, but she was silent. Who can say for sure? Okay, don't talk to my old woman, take advantage of the first snow this winter, it's hard to come out and walk around, let's go and see more. The topic of Shenju, the king of Linzi, choosing a concubine, was gently brought over. Naturally, everyone didn't dare to say anything, so they got up in twos and threes and went to the plum garden. For a while, the plum blossoms are cold and beautiful, and people look more delicate in the flowers. Qin Gaifei also took the hand of the palace man and got up and walked out, and a concubine with a melon seed face and a light purple palace dress sitting on the side also got up, and consciously followed behind her. Then Qin Gaifei took a look, and actually stopped in front of Yao Shi. She rarely smiled kindly, I want to talk to you as soon as you enter the Miyamoto Palace, after all, my mother often mentions your mother. How is my cousin doing? Yao Shi's mother and Qin Gaifei's mother are cousins, and she also heard her father mention it when she first entered the palace, but as the saying goes, one table is 3,000 miles, Yao Shi never dared to be as high profile as Xiao Shu when she entered the palace. After all, the in-law relationship between them was too shallow. You don't even expect people to remember it? She didn't expect that when she saw her for the first time today, the most favored concubine in the harem would come up to her and take the initiative to talk about it, and she couldn't help but feel hot in her heart, and hurriedly saluted. I saw it in the palace a few days ago, and my mother was in good health. At this point, there was a sudden pause. As soon as Yao Shi's eyes were raised, he saw the concubine standing next to Qin Gaifei, and after thinking about it for a while, his expression became a little cold, but he also saluted according to the rules. I've seen Wenjiu. Zhang Xuning, who was also about to get up and think about where to avoid trouble, heard these 3 words. Her heart jumped, and she directly pulled Fang Miao beside her without thinking about it, and said, let's go down and have a look. Fang Miao was stunned. Zhang Xuning had already taken her hand and walked out of the Shuexian directly, not looking back at all. That Qin Gaifei just pulled Yao Shi, and with a sweep of her eyes, she seemed to be about to call someone else, but she didn't expect to turn her head and see that the position at the end was already empty, and only 2 distant backs could be seen under the steps. At this time, if you call someone again, it seems a bit deliberate. Qin Gaifei's carefully described thin eyebrows were lightly raised, and she glanced at Xiao Shu, who had not walked out, and gave her a look of love can't help, and then walked out without any flaws with Wenjiu, who was a little timid and silent, and Yao Shi, who had just spoken. Fang Miao was dragged out by Zhang Xuning for a while, and before she came back to her senses, she couldn't help but look back. Her eyes showed a little thought, and she actually approached Zhang Xuning and asked, afraid that someone will harm you? Zhang Xunning's footsteps paused, and her pupils shrank. Fang Miao played with an old copper coin in his fingers, smiled, and said a little proudly, isn't the things in the palace like this? Turns out she didn't know. Zhang Xuning relaxed, brushed aside a hanging plum branch in front of her, and said with a smile, you also know that my situation has not been good recently, so be careful to sail the ship of 10,000 years. Fang Miaoxin had a relative, that's how it should be. Of course, Fang Miao also spent some effort to choose to enter the palace as a companion, but that is because he competes with the sisters in the family and competes for a face, and when he marries in the future, he can be said to have entered the palace as the companion of Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, and the natural scenery. But she never wanted to stay in the palace. In the current occasion with harem concubines, she is also like Zhang Xuning, she is unwilling to pinch her head, she can't hide from those who are far away, she is happy to walk around with Zhang Xuning, and she doesn't go to those ladies to join in the fun. Seeing that most of the hour passed, there was laughter and laughter in the plum garden, and nothing happened. Zhang Xuning couldn't help but think, maybe she was thinking too much. Where can such a thing be done in broad daylight? Isn't that too obvious? However, as soon as this thought came out, a series of exclamations suddenly came from the southwest corner of the plum garden in the distance, and then someone called. Mouse, Mouse. Are you okay? What's the matter with Miss Yao? So carelessly. The screaming sound of the palace people was obvious, and the people who admired the plum blossoms and saw the snow from near and far heard it, and they were all shocked for a while, and looked at the situation where the sound came from. Zhang Xuning couldn't help but glance at Fang Miao. The two of them also followed everyone far away and walked over there, and when they got closer, they saw that it was Qin Gaifei, Wenjiu, and Yao Shi, who saw the mouse when they were about to enjoy the plums, and they were all scared, and the thin and small Wenjiu fell to the snow, and the palace people all went up to help. Qin Gaifei frowned even more, and complained lightly about Yao's illet. Yao Shi opened her mouth, as if she was a little surprised, and wanted to defend something, but when she saw that Qin Gaifei didn't say anything, she had to stand aside, looking a little frightened. Watch the palace people go to help Wenjiu, and she will stay too. Wenjiu's position in this harem is not high, and seeing that Qin Gaifei treats Yao well, She smiled and said, Miss Yao doesn't have to blame. When everyone is scared, my body is forbidden to fall. It's okay. As soon as she said this, Yao Shi breathed a sigh of relief. However, when Jiu had just gotten up, her face turned a little pale, and she seemed to feel some discomfort in her abdomen, so she reached out to cover her stomach. The palace people were startled. What's wrong with Jiu? When Jiu's expression was still a little dazed, there seems to be some discomfort in the abdomen. She didn't realize it herself, but the concubines around her had quietly changed. However, all the people looked at each other, and none of them spoke at this moment. When Jiu held the maid's hand slightly, and this time she felt that the uncomfortable feeling was not so strong, and it seemed to be much better, so she laughed again and said, It's no big deal, let's continue to watch plum blossoms. Zhang Suiwei walked with Zhou Baoying and others, but when she saw this scene, her eyes flickered, and she couldn't help but say, Jiu Niang slipped and fell, her clothes were wet, and she was stained with slush. The weather is cold and the wind is cold, even the iron-beaten people can't bear it. You better go back to the palace to change into warm clothes, and then ask the imperial doctor to take a look and drink some hot soup to go to the cold, and then talk about the snow. She looked at Wen Jiu, her eyes were very serious. Wen Jiu seemed to finally realize something at this time, her body shook slightly, but she shrank even more, and couldn't help but look at Qin Gaifei and said, This young lady is right, I forgot about it, so I went back to the palace to change my clothes and come again, it's rude. Everyone hurriedly expressed concern for her and told her to go back quickly. Zhang Xuning looked at Wen Jiu's back, and her heart was cold. Sure enough, not 2 moments after Wen Jiu left, a little eunuch hurriedly ran to the plum garden, wiped the cold sweat on his head and said, Oh no. The entire Shuexian suddenly gasped for air. Yao Shi's face turned even pale, and he accidentally knocked over the cup on the table. However, no one could have noticed her gaffe anymore. Asterisk. What I heard in the previous life and what I experienced in this life really match again. However, from hearing to experiencing it, the feeling is completely different. In the previous life, Zhang Xuning only heard by accident that there was a concubine with a low rank in the harem who had a miscarriage, and Shen Lang was furious after knowing it, and he was angry with many people in the court, and he was dismissed as soon as he was angry, which attracted a lot of criticism from the courtiers. But she didn't know who this concubine was. Now in this life, I have almost seen it with my own eyes, and when I think of Qin Gaifei taking Wen Jiu to call Yao Shi before, I feel that the cold air is coming to my body. If something like this happens, what Yinmei appreciates the snow will naturally be gone. When they returned to fasting, they did not speak. Yao Shi, who was still sneering at Zhang Xuning for a few days ago, sat down as if she had been pumped out of her soul at this time, and didn't speak for a long time. Chen Chuyi came up to comfort her warmly. She actually covered her face with both hands, and cried in fear, and said in a row, I don't know, I didn't hit it, someone hit me in the back. It's none of my business. Who doesn't know that the heirs of the Saint Chen Lang are scarce today? He is about to stand and have no children under his knees. There is not even a prince in this harem, and the concubines are trying to give birth to the eldest son for the emperor. However, my stomach just didn't move. So far, there is indeed news in the court that the king of Linzi is going to be established as the emperor's younger brother, but after all, the 8 characters have not been schemed. If there is really a prince born, things must change. I just ran into Wen Jiu. If you let the holy know. Yao Shi thought about it, couldn't help but tremble, and cried even louder. Xiao Shu sat aside and frowned. Why are you so careless? Some people were relieved. Just wait for the news to see if Jiu Niang is okay. Zhang Shui looked at it silently. She knew the answer in the previous life. It was Shenju's turn to ascend the throne later, not to mention that she did hear this rumor in the harem at that time, and most of the children in Wenjiu's womb were not saved. Zhang Suiwai seemed to have some pity and sighed softly. No one spoke. In the fasting, I only heard Yao Shi's sad and frightened cry, which disturbed people's hearts. When it was getting dark, a palace man who had gone to inquire about the news finally ran back. Xiao Shu immediately stood up and asked, "How is it?" Zhang Xuning also looked over. The palace man gasped, and his eyes were full of excitement. "It's been saved." The adults in the hospital said that they found it early, and the cold was not deep, but fortunately nothing happened, but they should be extra careful in the future. What the? Saved? Zhang Xuaning's head suddenly buzzed, and there was an indescribable feeling in her heart, and she couldn't help but suddenly look back at Zhang Suiwai. It's not that she doesn't sympathize with Wenjiu. It's just that the shock at this moment is far beyond her expectations, and she didn't even expect Wenjiu's baby to be saved. It was only then that she realized that there was such a huge difference between this life and the previous life. In the last life, after she entered the palace as a companion, she didn't know that she had Xiao Shu, a potential opponent, and she didn't fit in the palace, let alone become friends with Shen Zai, so she didn't introduce Zhang Suiwai into the palace at all. It's different, it's completely different. If Wenjiu's baby is saved, if the child is born successfully, and if she is born as a boy, everything that will happen from now on will be earth-shaking compared with the previous life.